Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is David Pope from HooYu, and welcome to today's webinar with Stubbs Gazette, talking about how to re-verify the identity of your existing customers. So it is dead on 11 o'clock now. We're just going to pause for 2 minutes while we allow for a couple of stragglers to join, and then we'll be starting at 2 or 3 minutes past the hour. Thank you very much. Bye for now. Okay, right. So once again, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I think we're ready to start. So once again, welcome to today's webinar. What we're going to be tackling today is the thorny issue of how to re-verify existing customers, as is laid down by the regulations in the 4th and the 5th Money Laundering Directive, and also by the Criminal Justice Act and the imminent new Irish regulation, and more particularly how to re-verify those customers, but while still managing customers' fears about identity theft and phishing and identity fraud. So on today's webinar, briefly to begin with, we will do an introduction to HooYu and to Stubbs Gazette. We'll examine what the regulations say about customer re-verification, and then we'll have a look at how customers fear phishing and identity theft when they're approached by their bank, by their credit union, by their financial services provider to prove their identity. And then we'll look at a methodology to incentivize and to manage that re-verification program. And then lastly, we'll show you how using HooYu and Stubbs Gazette, you can manage that customer re-verification journey. Should you have any questions on today's webinar, please just shout out as we go, and then we'll tackle questions at the end. So with your when you're using GoToWebinar, there's a little box for you to type in your questions, probably on the right hand side. So if you type in those questions, then James and I will see them at the end and we'll answer your questions for you. So without further ado, let's get going, and I'm going to hand over to you now, James, to give us a heads up on Stubbs Gazette and how Stubbs is working with HooYu.
Good morning, everybody, and thanks for joining us on such a wonderful sunny day. I'm looking out the window, there isn't a cloud in the sky, so very diligent of you all to join us. Stubbs Gazette, you probably all know what we do at this stage. In the last couple of years, we've developed, on top of our credit bureau and debt management business, we have created a regulatory and compliance software and services, particularly around knowing your customer. We allow our customers to do anti-money laundering checks through our software, and we can also help them to remediate all of their customers or members against anti-money laundering databases, politically exposed people databases, and so on. And more recently, we have joined forces with HooYu, which is one of the top global ID verification companies based in London. And we've developed our capabilities with HooYu over the past 18 months. So we have a complete solution now around KYC.
Brilliant. Thank you, James. So in terms of HooYu, we're an identity verification company that combines lots of different identity technologies. So there's obviously lots of different identity companies out there, but they all do something different. You have some companies that do database checks, some companies that do PEPs and sanctions, some companies that do analysis of digital footprints or social media profiles, other companies that do document validation. And HooYu, together with Stubbs Gazette, we brought everything together in one place to enable Irish regulated merchants to either verify their customers at point of account creation or to verify them on an ongoing basis, as is laid down in the regulations. So just briefly then, what are some of the challenges that we see regulated businesses facing? Certainly in financial services, we see that companies are mandated to verify the identity of their customer, but sometimes that results in onerous or clunky verification processes whereby a customer is asked to go into a branch or a member is asked to go into the union to verify their identity. And obviously in today's digital age, now financial services are looking to really create a digital journey for their customers so that everything can take place online or on their mobile through digital channels. So the challenge then is not just to verify customers, but to verify customers whilst maximizing the success of that digital channel, and to do that, one has to minimize account opening abandonment. So HooYu interviewed several retail banks last year, and what we found out is that only 53% of all applications that were started were actually finished. So in other words, just under 1 in 2 applications are being abandoned along the way, and by and large that's because of clunky KYC processes. So that's what we're here to solve, not just helping comply with the Criminal Justice Act, but also to improve account opening processes and maximize customer account opening conversion. And of course, between Stubbs and ourselves, it's our job to prevent identity fraud and make life hard for the criminals. Criminals can go off and buy copies of fake identity documents, and at the same time, the staff that work in credit unions and banks, they're not experts in verifying a Bulgarian driving license or a Polish ID card or a French passport, and so on and so forth. So what HooYu and Stubbs have done is to really strengthen the front line in the fight against identity fraud. So let's now just turn to the regulations. Obviously, in whichever market we're working with, we look at how that particular member state has interpreted the 4th EU Money Laundering Directive. And obviously for now, the Criminal Justice Act 2010 is still the substantive legislation when it comes to customer due diligence in regulated sectors. And the Criminal Justice Act talks about identifying the customer and verifying the customer. And of course, identifying the customer and verifying the customer are 2 separate things. Identifying the customer just really means coming to know the customer's name and address and other information. And then verifying the customer identity means checking that information. And the regulation says that this can be on the basis of documents, and these documents can be in electronic form or information that that company has reasonable grounds to believe can be relied upon to confirm the identity of the customer. And obviously the Criminal Justice Act is pretty good. It's actually better than the UK regulations because it actually gives a bit more clarity around documents from a government source, whereas the UK regulation is actually a little bit vague. And further in the Criminal Justice Act, of course, it talks about when customers have to be verified. Initially, of course, surprise, surprise, it talks about verifying the customer during the establishment of the business relationship, but then it also talks about re-verifying customer identity on a risk-based approach. So James, over to you to talk through some of the things that you've seen in Ireland in terms of companies being fined for lack of customer re-verification or remediation. Remediation is another word, of course, for the re-verification process.
So yeah, as David said, a lot of the fines for breaches of the Anti-Money Laundering Acts and the Criminal Justice Acts are around re-verifying or remediating your existing customers or members, and it's a very difficult thing for organizations to do because in a lot of cases you may not have engaged with your customers or members for years or even decades, and just to further complicate matters, your databases may be fragmented and you may have inherited legacy databases. For example, if you're merging or taking over companies in the past, you would have had to take on board their customers or members. So that just adds a further layer of complication onto matters and adds more complication onto allowing you to know your customer properly. And to even further complicate matters, there's a cohort of customers in financial services sectors called pre-1995 customers. So if you took on board a customer before 1995, there was no obligation on you as an institution or organization to collect identity details on that customer. But under the Criminal Justice Act and the new anti-money laundering directives, there is an obligation for you to catch up with those pre-1995 members and to start remediating their identities. So a lot of the fines that have been handed down by the central bank over the last number of years, a part of the fine has been in relation to institutions, banks and credit unions not having adequate documentation and verification for all of your customers and members. There's also another cohort of customers in financial services called minor accounts. So again, it's account holders that are under a certain age. It used to be 18, I think it might have gone down to 16 now. So they were not obliged to have provided identity details at the account opening stage. But once they reach a certain age, then they are obliged to present the ID verification details if they want to continue doing business with your organization. Now, while these do present big challenges, there's also big opportunities as well in relation to use of clever technology, smart technology, digital technology to reach out to these cohorts of members in a smart and effective and streamlined way, and to start engaging with them, especially for minor accounts. And credit unions might be an example of this, where in Ireland, especially when kids make their first communion or holy confirmation, the first thing they do with their loot is they open up an account in their local credit union. And in a lot of cases, that's the last engagement they will have with that credit union, because typically when they go on to school and go on to college, the banks would start taking out student loans and mortgages or car loans, or with the banks as opposed to the credit unions. But with using smart ID verification technology, it allows credit unions and also banks and other financial services companies to engage with minor account holders in a meaningful way for them by using SMS and smart digital technology to engage with them, to allow them to update their ID verification, to take selfies, to take photographs of their passport and driving license, and to get them up and running and get them engaging with your organization again. So just in relation to the remediation, I think a lot of you will be familiar with the HooYu technology and how it allows customers, you to onboard new customers and check them against the various different Stubbs, anti-money laundering and PEP databases. But I think today we're just going to focus primarily on your existing customers and how do you ensure that you are not falling foul of the Criminal Justice Act and the anti-money laundering directives, and that you have adequate up-to-date ID documentation on all of your existing customers and members. So with that, I'll hand you back to David, and we can go through how this process could possibly make life a lot easier for you.
Lovely. Thanks for that, James. So it's a bit of a catch-22 situation insofar as the regulator says to banks that they have to go back and re-verify the identity of their customers, and at the same time the banks are saying to their customers, don't give away your banking details, don't give away your identity details, be vigilant against identity theft. So it is a little bit of a catch-22. These days now, we're all that little bit wiser around how fraudsters try to phish us, to phish our details, to phish our identity information so they can commit identity theft. So it is a difficult task for banks to do. So really the key question, the key equation is how can merchants effectively ask their customers to undertake KYC whilst assuaging their fears that it's actually not a phishing attempt by fraudsters. So to start to try and solve that equation, what we've done is we've analysed the different customer communication channels by the level of perception of risk of fraud or identity fraud or phishing. So if we look here at this chart, this shows the different ways that customers or members might interact with their credit union or their bank. So at the top is what we call the lowest risk of concern over phishing and fraud risk. And then as we go down the slide, the channels become progressively higher in terms of the risk, the perception of risk of phishing or identity fraud. So quite frankly, it makes sense to start at the top and try and re-verify your customers through those particular channels. So let's say, for example, I'm a customer, I call into my bank to cancel a direct debit or to ask some other question, then that is what I would call a very secure environment, because the customer has practically called into their bank using the same number they've always used, they've gone through security, and they know that they're actually talking to the bank. Likewise, if the customer is in their online banking facility or their app, and there's a message, notification, asking them to complete the re-verification process. Or likewise, if the customer is in their banking app or they're on their online credit union facility, and there's a pop-up that is served to ask them to recomplete the verification process. They're fairly trusted environments. Likewise, if the customer receives physical statements and they see a box on their promotion asking them to recomplete the verification process, then that's fairly trustworthy. But the second that customers start to have approaches to them outside of those trusted environments, namely if they start to get letters, emails, and SMSs, then rightly customers start to have a little bit of fear around phishing and identity theft. So ultimately, banks must use those channels because they have to re-verify all of their customer base, not just the ones that are kind enough to call in or go and check their messages in their online banking facility. But in my mind, it certainly makes sense to start at this place. And this is a nice, easy way to re-verify customers. The analogy I like to use with my clients is it's a little bit like the washing up. If you do it as you go along, it's nice and easy. If you leave it stacking up and then have to tackle it en masse, it becomes this horrible job that you put off and you put off and you don't do, then ultimately you get told off by the wife or you get fined by the regulator. So in this use case, This is where a customer has called in to customer services and they need to check the value of their account, please. So at that point, the customer service agent, they resolve that query for the customer. But once that's resolved, say, oh, one last thing today, madam. Today, we've recently upgraded our policies to prevent financial crime and protect our customers, and we're now required to reconfirm the identities of our existing customers. Is that okay with you? So at that point, the customer says, yeah, no worries, sure. What do I have to do? Thank you, madam. So you'll shortly receive a text from us asking you to use the HooYu identity confirmation service to provide a selfie, an ID document, and a utility bill. Is that okay? Yeah, sure. That's fine. Thanks, madam. I'm sending the SMS for the HooYu verification request now. So in the meantime, your customer service agents, they have access to the Stubbs HooYu identity verification platform, and what they've done is they've entered in the customer name from they have there on their CRM system. They've added the customer gender, nationality, date of birth, and their phone number, and then that means that that customer has been sent a text from HooYu, but the text is branded from your particular credit union or bank, and then the customer receives that whilst they're still on the phone to you. So again, it's a very trusted environment. It's a very natural thing for the customers to then proceed with that verification request. So once they click on that SMS or the link in the email that they receive, then they get taken through to a branded instance of HooYu that is branded per your credit union brand colors or per your bank colors. So it looks and feels like it's part of your process. And at that point, the customer is asked to take a selfie, say what is their name from digital footprint sources such as LinkedIn or PayPal or Facebook, and then they're asked to take a picture of their ID document and then perhaps a picture of an address document so that HooYu can then look at that information, do a biometric facial comparison between the face in the selfie and the face in the ID document, so it can authenticate that identity document and also examine that customer's online identity. So HooYu, of course, then cross-references all the data, makes sure that it's working with trusted sources that it likes, and then produces an identity confirmation report that says, yep, we've verified the ID document, yep, we've seen the correct name and address on the utility bill or the bank statement, and yes, everything corroborates and cross-references nicely. So overall, we've got a nice consistent set of information, so we'll be confident that that customer is who they say they are, and that we verified the identity to the standards laid down in the Criminal Justice Act. So at that point, HooYu then passes all the results of the verification back to you, the merchant, and then redirects the customer away from that HooYu page back onto your website. So that's a nice, easy process to follow from the customer perspective, but more importantly, it's a nice, easy place to start the process in a trusted environment when the customer has already called in to your customer services center. So, of course, it'd be nice to think that that's a nice, easy way to re-verify the identities of all your existing customers. Sadly, not all customers call into the call center, and so there still remains a project to reach out to those customers and ask them to go through the re-verification process. So here's a few thoughts on how to incentivize those customers, basically. So first off, it's very important to remember that whilst it's very important to the merchant, to you, the regulated entity, it's less important to the customer to do what you've asked them to do, so that you're compliant with the money laundering requirements. So always think about the customer, and they're going to be thinking, what's in it for me? So you have to think about what you have in your toolkit that you can give them or not give them unless they go through the re-verification process. So what new product feature might they not be eligible for? Maybe it's application for the end of year ISA. So in that instance, you would certainly be playing on that customer's fear of missing out. One thing that a lot of the cool new fintech companies are doing is that they create wait lists. Whether that customer really needs to wait or not for their facility to go live is actually immaterial. But the concept of wait lists makes people follow a bit of a Pavlovian response, so they know that they there's something worth waiting for, they'll get this access, this new app or this new feature, but only if they go on the wait list, and of course, only if they go through the HooYu verification process. So that's the way to think about it from the customer's perspective. Of course, you can also use a bit of grey matter at your end and use a bit of creativity to get customers to participate in re-verification programs. So, for example, if a customer anniversary is coming up, then that gives you occasion to reach out to the customer, to write to them, to call them, to say, oh, thank you for being a customer for 2 years. We now need to re-verify your details as part of the law. Or let's say, for example, it's a customer birthday. Could be their 50th birthday, could be their 18th birthday. Maybe it's a customer who is now eligible for a product upgrade, so they can migrate from a foundation level account to an account that has a credit facility on it in terms of an overdraft or a loan. So at that point, you can get creative, send a birthday card to the customer in the post, send them a digital card, call them from the call center to wish them a happy birthday, and then at that point say, look, we're ready to upgrade your account. You're now ready for an adult account, but we need to take you through the re-verification process. Alternatively, you can gamify your approach to your customers. So let's say that a customer completes their 1000th transaction, their 100th login to their online banking. So that again creates a point of interaction between yourselves and your customer to give legitimacy to the request and to give momentum to the re-verification process. And lastly, what levers do you have? So what can you threaten to do? So the above options were very much carrot. What stick do you have? So what functionality on the account can you hold back until they complete the re-verification process? So maybe it's interest payments, maybe they can't activate a new card, maybe they can't create any new direct debits, and so on and so forth. So that's one very much for you guys to think through in terms of what levers you have to force customers through the re-verification process. So that's a section on how to incentivize customers. Now let's look at what communication strategy you can put behind that to really help funnel your customers through the process. So as with any form of communication, segmentation is your starting point. So segment your customers by what available contact data you have on them. Based on what countries they're in, you may be able to perform database identity checks. What age are they? So really get your customers in different pots. And once they're in different pots, then you can create a communication strategy that's relevant to that pot. So if you have a pot that's going to be done whereby the re-verification will be satisfied through database checks, then that's great. Maybe that's a list of, maybe those customers are directors of companies in Ireland, and of course they're using the Stubbs databases. The HooYu process can re-verify them through the database checks. But let's suppose that other customers, you think you only need to re-verify them to the point of getting an identity document from them, or let's suppose that some customers you need to re-verify their identity by getting an identity document and an address document. So you can really start to get granular with those customers and put them in separate discrete pots and work on them as separate pots, separate campaigns. So you break it down into nice bite-sized chunks. And of course, one of the side benefits of this sort of exercise is that it gives you a great opportunity to really clean up your database quality. So next, what comms schedule, what communication schedule can you use on these customers? So I've always been a big fan of the tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you've told them approach. In other words, it's a multi-phased comms approach, so that if customers don't see the first email, they might see the second email, and you've also done your level best to really build awareness for what it is you're asking the customers to do. Then the point at which you ask them to do it, and you send out the HooYu request to them, then they've already been educated and they know that this request is on its way. When we've worked with clients in the past, of course, we've also found it very important to work on the internal resources to prep the business that this process is going on, to make sure that the customer services team know it's happening, and to really brief them. Commonly, some of the replies from customers when you ask them to go through re-verification procedures is, "What? I've been a customer. I've been a loyal customer for over 20 years. Why do I need to do this now?" So you definitely need to be ready for that kind of objection. So that's a few of the consideration in terms of how you should build your methodology for re-verification of existing customers. Here's how the HooYu approach works for you. So once you've spoken to your customer, you've forewarned them, you've spoken to them, you've emailed them, you've written to them, and they know they're going to be asked to go through the HooYu process to re-verify their identity. Then you send them an email and or a text. This all happens in a nice automated fashion using the HooYu platform. And then that customer gets sent to a landing page whereby they're given a brief about what it is they're asked to do. They are shown a video about what it is they're asked to do. They have a message from you, the credit union, the bank, reminding them what they're asked to do, and they get started on the process. So the first part of the process is a bit of geolocation. Where is that customer at the moment when they complete that re-verification process? So we geolocate the device based on the device settings. We also geolocate the customer based on the IP address of where they connect to the internet when they're doing that re-verification process, and we translate that into a latitude and longitude as well. That's possibly great insight for looking at the bonds of credit unions and where their customers are located, and of course where they're supposed to be located. So the next stage is a selfie, where the customer is asked to take a quick selfie. This, of course, is above and beyond the requirements of the Criminal Justice Act, but the reason it's in place is impersonation detection, to deflect the fraudsters who are trying to use someone else's identity, and so you actually know that you're working with your customer, and it really is that person, as opposed to somebody who's pretending to be one of your customers. The next section, again, is another impersonation detection process. So this is very much an optional part of the process. But what we've done here is we have integrated into PayPal, LinkedIn, Google+, Yahoo, Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft, and a few others besides. And what we have there is a process whereby when the customer gives their consent, that they can then basically exchange details with HooYu, the likes of PayPal or Google Plus or Amazon or whoever will pass back the profile data of that customer back to HooYu when the customer gives their permission, and that data is used to prove that customer identity. So the kind of data we get passed back is first name, last name, telephone number, date of birth, email address, gender, nationality, and of course all this is rich information for KYC processes. But of course, we don't take it at face value. We really interrogate that data to decide if it's going to be a trustworthy source. So in the instance of Facebook, for example, what we'll do there is we'll analyze something like 300 different data points on that profile. But some of the obvious ones are, how old is that profile and how many people are they connected to? So in other words, is it a profile that was made last night for the purposes of defrauding a credit union? Or does it go back 2, 3, 5, or even up to 10 years? And is that profile connected to like 10 other dodgy profiles, or are they connected to scores or hundreds of other profiles? Then we would measure the amount of content that's been put to that network. So how many posts, how many articles, how many book reviews, how many videos, how many albums, how many check-ins, and so on and so forth. And we chart that content over the course of time using normative distribution analysis. And then the bit of it I really like is that what we then do is we analyze how many other profiles on Facebook have interacted with that profile by virtue of replying to a comment or liking a photo and so on and so forth. So this is a really strong part of the system. My stats on Facebook are that I am connected to 147 other people, but 259 other accounts have actually interacted with my profile. So it makes it exponentially harder for the fraudster to create a believable fake Facebook account, because there have to be hundreds of other accounts to give it legitimacy and reality. So that's an optional part of the process. Our clients tend to use this on a risk-based approach. The higher the risk they see in the transaction, the more sources they ask the customer to provide during the verification process. So then we're into the document verification process. So again, on a risk-based approach, you can ask your clients to provide less or more documentation. One of our clients in Ireland, they ask for 2 identity documents, but commonly most of them just ask for 1 identity document to be able to prove customer identity. And what we will then do is we'll validate the identity document by checking the security features. Before we do that, though, we do a little bit of triage on the document to make sure that it's actually a good image. Is it a photo of a cat or a dog, or is it actually an ID document? And then if the customer's taken a poor image, we'll message them in real time to say, for example, oh, look, sorry, you've taken a photo with your flash. Look, there's a great big flash mark on it. Can you take it but turn your flash off this time? So there's dynamic error messages based on what our computer vision technology sees about the document. And then we start to validate the actual security features. With the proof of address document, what we're doing there is we're saying, right, can we see the name and address that was on the customer application, that's on this customer file? Can we see that name and address on the address document? Does it match? And also, is it within 2 months or 3 months or 6 months, depending on what age range of the address document you guys are happy to accept? So once we've done that, we've validated the security features on the ID document. In other words, once we've checked the machine readable zone to make sure that everything checks out there. So say, for example, if you're Irish, you're male, you're born in 1974, then the 17th character on the bottom of the passport has to be Y, the 3rd character has to be 0, the 10th character has to be 3, and so on and so forth. We'll do checks for forgery and tampering. Can we see the same pixels in more than one place on the same image, and so on and so forth. Then we basically, what we can also do is if that image isn't a great image, or let's suppose it's a paper Irish driving license, then we can have that document sent to our manual experts who are based here in the UK. And then that document is examined by our manual document experts, and they blow that document up, look for tiny signs of tampering and forgery. They look at the hologram, the kineogram, the microprint. They do a layout check and check it's the right font that's been used, it's the right font size. There's all sorts of little things they check for there, and then they'll do a contextual analysis to make sure that all the document security features are working together nicely. So say, for example, is the hologram on top of the laminate, is the photo underneath the laminate, and is the microprint edging its way across the top of the photo? So once we've done all that and we're satisfied with the customer identity, and of course, this takes place in less than 60 seconds when we can verify the document automatically, 60 seconds end-to-end process for your customers. Then once that has happened, then we exit that process and we redirect the user back to whatever page you want them to go to next in the customer journey, so they could log back into their account, they could go on to a special offers page, and so on and so forth. And at the same time, we send the results of the process back to you, the merchant, using the API. If you've done a Stubbs database check as part of that process, then we send you back the results of the Stubbs database check. Otherwise, we send you back also the image of the selfie, the image of the ID document, the image of the address document, along with a nice detailed report that shows all the work that's been done. So you can then say to the regulator, yeah, look, here's the report, here's the re-verification we did, it was done on this date at this time, and this is the outcome. So that's an overview of the HooYu Stubbs process. Let's go to questions now. But before we go to, essentially, you can ask your questions through the panel on the right-hand side. Before we go to questions, James, have you got anything you want to add?
That was very informative, David. Thanks a million. One thing you mentioned earlier on, which I thought was very clever, is to be creative, for companies to be creative and use their grey matter when reaching out to their existing customers and when they're trying to remediate their existing customers. And I think that's very important. And as you mentioned, a lot of customers are very familiar with phishing scams and fraud emails and SMSs. And would be reluctant to open up an SMS that's unsolicited. And the financial services companies are constantly educating their customers not to open up emails because they would never send out an email looking to re-verify a customer's details. So it does require a bit of creativity from the customers to reach out to your customers, and it depends on what the nature of your business is or what your business model is. But for example, if you're trying to remediate minor accounts, you might decide to send out a digital birthday card because you will have their date of birth. You'll know their birthday is in a week's time or 2 weeks' time. So you may decide to send out both a physical card and a digital card and have some kind of incentive for them to contact your call center. And then you could even follow that up with a call out to the customer. So it's by using a combination of old technology with this new digital technology, which I think will get you the best results. There's also the big problem of a lot of organizations' databases are very fragmented. So data cleansing is a big issue. And we have helped customers in the past, large and small customers, to do a health check on their the customer databases before they do anything, and then help them to clean it up by getting rid of duplications, by getting rid of deceased customers and members, and just looking for small little things in the databases. It might be something like your email address may be missing one of the O's from Google Mail, and just helping to use automation to help you clean up your database. More recently, we have error-coded all of our data. So that's quite helpful when you're looking to get a single customer view on your customers by using the error code as almost like the keystone or the link to bring all of your customers' data together in one single view. Now that does require you guys error coding your own customer databases, and again, we've done that for some of our customers already, and already they're beginning to see the benefits. And one of the benefits is that it does help in the remediation to comply with AML directives and the Criminal Justice Act. So yeah, this is it's a bit like GDPR. It's here to stay. It's here for the long haul. So it's not something that you're probably going to get to grips with overnight. It is an ongoing process, and we're certainly between ourselves and HooYu, we are experts in this. David's background would be in ID verification and fraud prevention over the last couple of decades, the same as ourselves. So we have the expertise between both of us to kind of give you advice and hopefully to answer some of your questions. There's one interesting question came in from an accountancy practice in Waterford. The question from them was, can we identify directors without requiring them to provide ID documentation, and can we verify them by using databases? And the answer is yes. The Stubbs database does have every single director and shareholder and business owner in Ireland and indeed all around the world with date of births and addresses. So you can use it as a basic KYC check using databases. But if it's a new customer, you will have to do that in conjunction with actually getting a copy of their passport or driving license and a proof of address. And also, if you haven't dealt with a customer in a long time and they come back to you with some new activity they want you to perform, you probably will have to get proof of their identity and proof of their address at that stage. But again, there's no one size fits all, and there's no real prescription for different organizations. It's all based on your own risk-based assessment, and you might have different cohorts of customers within your customer database that require a different approach. And one other thing, especially for legal firms and accountancy firms, is for some of your customers, you will be obliged to do a beneficial ownership check. And we have databases that link in worldwide to inform you whether one of your customers has company shares or is a director of companies anywhere in the world, including some of these tax havens in the Bahamas and elsewhere. So yeah, that's something that we have built into the complete solution for KYC.
Cool. So we've got another question from one of today's attendees saying, purchase expensive software to install this service in my credit union. So the answer to that is no. You don't need to purchase any software. HooYu is a on-demand service whereby you would just log on to your HooYu account, and you can send verifications off on a one-by-one basis. Of course, there is some small minimum order value to work with that you would contract with Stubbs for, but you don't need to purchase software. It's let's say you just needed to verify 1,000 customers a year, then you would only pay for those 1,000 customers. If you needed to verify 50,000 customers a year, then you pay to verify 50,000. So it's on an on-demand basis based on how many customers you need to verify or re-verify each year. We also have a question from somebody who's asked, how do you verify a UK resident wishing to buy property here in the Republic? So what we'd do there is allow you to use the HooYu UK databases, whereby you can search the UK resident's name and address and date of birth against our databases. And by and large, that would allow you to verify 75–80% of those types of customers. And then that would mean that 20% of those customers would then go through the HooYu identity engine process that we showed today, whereby the customer is asked to provide any of the above, a selfie, an identity document, and a proof of address document. So that would be that particular process. We have another question as well from somebody asking if it's a global identity verification service. And so yes, the HooYu service works for any country in the world, 212 countries or thereabouts, for passport, identity card, driving license, residence permit, travel visa, and so on and so forth. Some country documents we can't verify automatically. So say, for example, the Italian paper-based ID card, that always has to go to manual. But by and large, we're able to verify documents using our automatic technology as well as the manual process as well. One of today's attendees has asked, how much does it cost? So that really depends on a client-by-client basis, based on how much work you want us to do to verify the customer. Do you want to verify one identity document, and one proof of address document, and so on and so forth? But of course, the team from Stubbs will be in touch with you to understand your requirements and put together a pricing package for you. Okay, so I think that's it for the questions for today. But please email James with any questions. James's contact details are about to be on the screen. There we go. So any further questions, please email to James, and we'd be more than happy to answer them for you. So thank you very much for attending today. James, over to you to wrap up. Oh, James, are you there? Okay, right. Well, I think that's us done for the day. Thank you very much, guys. Have a wonderful rest of the day. Hope you get to enjoy some of the sunshine. Thank you. Goodbye.